Hey friends, welcome to the Miss Ink Stamps YouTube channel. My name is Lauren and I'm super excited to share with you how I created this very green and black birthday card using some products from the latest release from Miss Ink Stamps. But first I'm going to start with creating an alcohol ink background. I have a sheet of 5x7 Yupo paper and I'm laying down some of my alcohol blending solution, and I have three different types of alcohols, and one of them is an alloy. So two alcohol inks and alloy to create my background today. I'm using Everglades from Ranger Ink as well as Mojito, and then the sterling alloy, which is a nice pretty silver look. I thought these two greens plus the silver were perfect for these characters from the new Mischief Makers stamp set. So I'm just using a little air blower. I got it on Amazon pretty cheap, but of course Ranger has theirs as well. And I'm just using that to try to move the alcohol ink around, especially with that alcohol blending solution, just to fill in this 5x7 sheet of Yupo paper. I'm only going to use a small portion, but I like to create a full sheet when I have all my alcohol inks out because I don't do it as often as I probably should. So I wanted to make sure I had plenty of backgrounds for future projects. I've already stamped, colored, and die cut these three little ambitious house gang and a little cupcake from the stamp set, and I stamped them onto alcohol marker friendly cardstock with a black alcohol marker friendly ink and colored them in with Oh Hoo Hoo art markers, which are, if you could probably guess, alcohol markers. I'm going to work on my next background, which is going to be some stenciling. So I'm trimming down a piece of black cardstock, and I'm going to use this mini scalloped rectangle die. It's slightly smaller than A2, so I trimmed my black paper to be 4¼ by 5½, and I was able to cut out this black piece of cardstock. And we're going to do some stenciling with this new snake stencil, which is just perfect for these three fandom characters. I'm going to line up my black paper behind the stencil and then use some repositionable mint tape. This is from scrapbook.com to hold my paper in place on the back side of the stencil. My glass mat is magnetic, so I can use my magnets, but this is a very nicely detailed stencil, and I just really didn't want anything to move. I was going to use one particular stencil paste, but I wanted it to be more yellow green than a blue green. I thought it would match the coloring that I did on my characters. So this color is called Fake Plant, and it's from Ranger Ink and Simon Hurley, called Lunar Paste. It's a very nice and smooth stencil paste. It has actually a little bit of a sheen to it, so it's very pretty once it dries, and it reflects really nicely in light. So once I have a nice even cover on my stencil to my black cardstock, I love a good stencil reveal, so let's take a look at how cool these snakes look in green on black cardstock. I'm loving it. So I'm going to peel off those pieces of mint tape, and I'm going to go rush and get my stencil into some soapy water so it can soak along with my palette knife, and I'll go ahead and wipe it off later. So I cleaned up my workstation and my alcohol ink background is now dry. So I'm going to grab another one of those mini scalloped rectangle dies. This particular set kind of has like a stackable, so they're all within that A2 kind of sized, so it'll fit really nicely on the center of my background. So I'm using it to kind of figure out where I think the best part of my background is, and now I have a very cool alcohol inked background with greens and silver, and then my black and green snake, even more of a background. So now let's work on a sentiment. I'm going to grab VersaFine Clair, and I felt that the green Oasis ink matched everything the best, and I'm stamping the sentiment Happy Birthday from the gang, which is also from the Mischief Makers stamp set. I'm stamping it onto some white cardstock, and I'm just going to trim it down. I'm using some large scissors, and then I grabbed a little mini paper cutter, and I'm going to use this to cut around my sentiment. I was pretty happy with the spacing on the bottom and on the right, so I'm just going to trim off the left and the top. Now this is a very small piece of cardstock, and trying to hold it in place while cutting is not always the easiest. So I'm just grabbing a piece of purple tape to hold that down onto my little paper trimmer while I trim it so I know it won't move and I won't just slice through my sentiment and be sad. So now I have that ready. I'm going to just glue it onto some extra black cardstock. That way it has a little bit of a frame. Everything is very, black and dark on this card, so just keeping with that same consistent look. So I glued it down to the corner of my black piece of cardstock here, and now I'm just going to trim around it just like I did with the white cardstock. Since I glued it into the corner, I only need to trim on the top and side of my sentiment. My background is pretty much dry. I probably should have waited a little longer, but I am an anxious crafter and I want to know what my project's going to look like all finished, so we're just going to go with it. I have an A2 size card base and I'm just reinforcing that score line, and I'm going to use my tape runner to adhere down this stenciled background. Now, because I did a lot of torture to this paper using some stencil paste, I want to make sure to use a nice sturdy adhesive. So I went ahead and placed the adhesive onto the white cardstock because I wasn't sure if all my snakes were dry. So that way I could gently kind of press down my background onto the card base. Now I did get a little bit of stencil paste on my white card base. It really is not that noticeable, but I did try to take a little sand eraser to try to get some of that ink off. Again, I don't think it's really that noticeable, so no problem. I have some foam adhesive and I'm going to go ahead and put that on the back of my alcohol inked background just to pop it up and give some dimension to my card. Once I have that completely backed with foam adhesive, I'll go ahead and peel off the release paper, and then using my grid mat, I'm going to try and get that as centered as possible onto that snake stenciled background. Now I'm going to add my characters and I'm going to add a little bit more foam adhesive. This particular brand that I'm using is not a very thick foam adhesive, so having 2 layers of foam doesn't really add too much bulk to the card. Now it is a little bulky, but I do love my foam adhesive, so I'm okay with that bulk. If you prefer flatter cards, you can definitely just glue all these layers together with your tape runner or your wet glue. So just do whatever is best for you. I'm adding all 3 of these characters, again using that foam adhesive, and then I will move on to adding my sentiment. I'm going to overlap my sentiment with a couple of the characters, so I'm just going to use some wet glue for my the back of the sentiment. So just going to grab my wet glue, completely cover the back, and then I'm going to layer it over my 2 characters on the left, one on the left and one in the middle. Then I have my little cupcake. This is colored to look like the floating cupcake, if you know what I'm talking about. So I just thought it'd be fun to add that little floating cupcake into the scene. I had a hard time figuring out where I wanted to add it, and I finally just settled on the top left corner. But then I felt like my card was a little unbalanced, so I'm going to grab my Pops of Color, which is just a liquid embellishment, and I'm adding a bunch of little dots in the other corners and including a couple near my cupcake, and I will tap on the inside of the card to get my little pops to dome out. Instead of being like a little Hershey kiss, it looks more like an enamel dot. Here is a final look at my ambitious house birthday gang card. I hope you enjoyed this process and are able to see the stencil and these new characters in action. You can find a list of everything I used down below in the description box, but thank you so much for watching and have a wonderful day.